Hey there folks, welcome to a quick note where we dive into intriguing topics that keep us wondering. Today we're unraveling the mysteries of Mount Toba's eruption, a colossal event that shook our world. But before we get started, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to A Quick Note for more captivating explorations. Now, let's jump into the story of Mount Toba. Around 74,000 years back, Earth went through a really big disaster. Scientists call it the Toba Catastrophe. It caused a lot of animals to disappear forever. The ground was covered in ash like a big blanket. The sky turned really dark and it got super cold. Even plants didn't want to grow anymore. The people left had to stick close together just to stay warm during this scary time. It was like a never-ending nightmare. 74,000 years ago, the massive Mount Toba volcano in what is now Sumatra blew up. This explosion was a game-changer for our planet. Some experts even think it came close to wiping out the entire human race. The Toba Catastrophe Theory. It's kind of surprising, but when you look at the genes, the things that make us who we are, of humans, we don't have as much variety as you might expect. In fact, all 8 billion of us have less genetic diversity than a small group of 50 chimpanzees who are closely related. It's like we're all more similar to each other than a tiny bunch of chimpanzees are. So, why is this? Well, there are some theories that try to explain it. One is called the Toba Catastrophe Theory, and another is the human bottleneck hypothesis. Both of these ideas suggest that about 74,000 years ago, something really bad happened to humans. It was like a big disaster caused by a huge volcano called Mount Toba, which you can still find on an island in Indonesia called Sumatra. This disaster was so intense that it almost wiped out our entire species, and that's why we don't have as much genetic diversity as you might expect. Think about this. After the big volcano explosion from Mount Toba, climate models tell us that the world's average temperature dropped by a whopping 15 degrees Celsius. That's a huge change. Now, when scientists looked at our genes, the stuff that makes us unique, they saw something interesting. It looked like the human population took a big hit, kind of like a genetic bottleneck. This means there was a serious drop in the variety of genes that make up our species. Some smart people think that during this tough time, our whole species might have shrunk down to just a few thousand individuals. And get this, there might have been as few as 1,000 pairs of humans having babies during that time. That could be why we don't have a lot of genetic differences among us today. It's like our family tree went through a really tough and small patch in the past. The theory suggests that after the tough times caused by Mount Toba's eruption, our human ancestors managed to survive in small groups spread out across different parts of Africa. These groups later grew in numbers and spread out to repopulate. But hold on. Lately, some smart people are taking a closer look at this theory. The evidence we're finding is making things a bit confusing. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where some pieces don't quite fit the way we thought they did. So, the once widely accepted idea is now getting a second look and some extra thinking. The eruption data. Okay, let's talk about how we measure the explosiveness of volcanoes. It's done with something called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, VEI. It's kind of like the Richter scale for earthquakes. Every time the VEI number goes up by 1, the volcano's power increases by a factor of 10. So if one volcano has a VEI of 5 and another has a VEI of 4, the first one is 10 times more powerful. Now check this out. Mount Toba's VEI is estimated to be a whopping 8, the highest on the scale. Just to give you an idea, when Mount St. Helens erupted, it measured a 5. Toba was 1,000 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens and 100 times stronger than the Krakatoa eruption, which was a VEI 6. Krakatoa was so intense that the sound of its blast traveled around the Earth 4 times. That's how you know Toba's eruption was on a whole other level. Back in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted with a VEI of 7, shooting a massive amount of ash into the air. This event was so extreme that the following year, 1816, became famous as the Year Without a Summer. Crops failed all over the world, and believe it or not, it even snowed in Virginia on July 4th. Now, Toba's eruption was even more powerful than Tambora, like 10 times more powerful. When Toba exploded, those nearby didn't stand a chance. There was something called pyroclastic flow, basically a super hot mix of gas and ash coming out at 1100 degrees Celsius and zooming along at 320 kilometers per hour. Anyone who got near that stuff would have been in serious trouble, like no chance to survive trouble. It was intense. When scientists measure the amount of stuff that Mount Toba shot out during its eruption, they use a fancy term called dense rock equivalent, or DRE. The crazy part is, Toba spat out somewhere between 2,800 cubic kilometers and 6,000 cubic kilometers of this stuff. And get this, it did all of that in just 9 to 14 days. Now let's put this into perspective. This makes every other volcano in history look tiny. Remember Vesuvius, the one that buried Pompeii? Yeah, that's like a little speck compared to Toba. Even Mount St. Helens, which made a big mess in 1980, seems like child's play when you compare it to the colossal eruption of Toba. It was a total game changer in the world of volcanic explosions. How the climate changed. Figuring out exactly what happened after the Toba eruption is a bit tricky, but scientists are doing their best. When they study the layers of sediment left behind, it looks like something changed in the climate, maybe because of the eruption, maybe not. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some pieces are missing. Here's what they think. A shift in the climate was probably already starting, and the Toba eruption might have given it a big push. Temperatures took a dive, signaling the beginning of an ice age. This icy era made life tough for many species, and they had to adapt to survive. Now, whether Toba directly caused the ice age is still a bit unclear, but it definitely played a part in making it happen faster. So, in a way you could say Toba had a hand in bringing on the chillier times. What could the apocalypse have been like? The folks living in Sumatra had a really tough time during the Toba eruption. Many of them probably didn't make it through the first few days. It was that intense. Those who did survive had a more drawn-out and painful experience. Several feet of toxic mass. Now, the impact wasn't just limited to Sumatra. Even in India, about 5,000 kilometers away, the ground got buried under 6 inches of ash. And it didn't stop there. Traces of Toba's ash have been found all the way in Africa, near Lake Malawi, and on the southern coast of South Africa, a whopping 8,900 kilometers away. That ash might look fluffy like snow, but it's actually heavy and dangerous. Breathing in the fine dust turned into a kind of cement-like substance in people's lungs. Those who inhaled it would have suffered, some going through a lingering and painful death. Plus, all the water sources got covered in this slushy, ash-filled mud, making things even harder for those trying to survive. It was a really tough time for everyone affected by the Toba eruption. If the eruption of Tambora blanketed the sun and turned the entire following year into a miserable winter, Mount Toba would have been exponentially worse, with some academics positing the volcanic winter could have lasted hundreds of years. If this were the case, there would have certainly been an era of darkness and cold, which would have wiped out many plant and animal species and driven many others, including humans, to the brink of extinction. If there were a mass die-off of plants and animals, humans would have struggled to survive. Controversies and arguments. Let's talk about the Toba eruption theory for a moment. Back in the 1990s and 2000s, a lot of smart folks agreed that the catastrophic Toba eruption caused a kind of bottleneck for humans. But here's the thing, as more discoveries are made, some academics are really digging into this theory and questioning it. What everyone agrees on is that Mount Toba exploded like nothing humans had ever seen before. It was a total force of nature. Now, the big debate among experts is not whether it happened, but how exactly it affected the human species. So it's like everyone saw the same big explosion, but they're still figuring out the full story of what it meant for us humans. The Toba eruption is keeping the scientists on their toes, that's for sure. Alright, so here's the deal with the bottleneck theory. Some smart people suggest that after the Toba eruption there was something called a volcanic winter that lasted up to 10 years. During this time, plants might have had a tough time surviving, leading to a big shortage of food. This could have caused a major hunger crisis for animals and humans alike. And guess what? There's evidence hinting that other animals like East African chimpanzees, Bornean orangutans, Central Indian macaques, tigers and cheetahs went through a similar tough period. Now in 2021, some researchers crunched the numbers and said, hold up, According to their study, the temperature drop caused by the eruption wouldn't have been as extreme as we thought, just around 3.5 degrees C, 6.3 DGF. And get this, they believe temperatures would have bounced back to normal within 5 years after the eruption. This finding challenges the idea that there was a massive plant die-off in tropical regions during that time. So, the bottleneck theory is like a puzzle, and scientists are still figuring out how all the pieces fit together. Did a mass die-off really happen, or did things recover faster than we thought? It's an ongoing debate among the experts. Let's talk about the survival story of different human species after the Toba eruption. Neanderthals, for instance, hung around until about 35,000 years ago. Their living space was already pretty chilly, and a drop in temperatures after Toba would have made things even tougher. Now, what's really intriguing is that Homo floresiensis, another human species, seemed to survive for at least 20,000 years after the big eruption. They were chilling on the island of Flores, just about 2,600 kilometers away. Now, it gets a bit controversial when we look at the Asian subcontinent. India got hit hard by the ash cloud from Toba. Some folks argue against the Toba Catastrophe Theory, pointing to evidence of plenty of people living in the Jureru Valley right before and after the eruption. On the other side, supporters of the theory highlight other places in India, like the Middle Sun Valley to the north, showing a big drop in population. They say people might have found refuge in the Jureru Valley, which had fresh water from springs, making it a safer spot to survive. So, it's like a detective story where experts are trying to piece together the puzzle of human survival after Toba. Looking at evidence of thriving human communities on the southern coast of Africa makes us question how severely Mount Toba's eruption affected humanity. It's possible that this region was a refuge, less impacted than others. While some signs suggest our species almost faced extinction, like genetic clues, core samples from the Earth and climate models, there's also evidence pointing in the opposite direction. With what we know now, it's tricky to state anything as a sure fact. One thing we can say for sure is that Mount Toba's eruption is the biggest volcanic blast humans have ever experienced. Studying its aftermath might give us insights into how to handle a similar event in the future. But here's the real kicker. Supervolcanoes could blow their top without any warning. Whether it happens tomorrow or thousands of years from now, that day will be a seriously dark and scary chapter in human history. The unpredictability of such events keeps us on our toes, and understanding Toba's impact helps us be better prepared for whatever might come our way. That wraps up our quick journey into the explosive history of Mount Toba. If you found this as fascinating as we did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more quick notes on the incredible stories that shape our world. Thanks for joining us on A Quick Note.